President Biden's rampant spending spree continues as he announces $9 billion in student loan debt relief. That is amidst the repayment pause that is coming to an end. Home ownership is officially nearly unattainable in nearly 80% of U.S. counties, though judging by our current economic environment, if you haven't been living under a rock, that is a surprise to nobody. And Sudafed, the popular over-the-counter decongestant, may have been one of the greatest pharmaceutical scams in our nation's history. We'll talk about all of this and more today on the Javy Hour. All right, we've got a whole lot on the political plate today, so let's just jump into it. President Joe Biden announced on Wednesday that his administration will deploy about $9 billion in student debt relief, which will be divvied up to about 125,000 American borrowers. Now, $9 billion, that covers about 0.5%. Let me say that again. 0.5% of the approximate $1.76 trillion that U.S. borrowers currently owe. And the timing of this announcement couldn't have been worse. Another $444 billion was just added to our national debt the other day. So this $9 billion, disguised as aid to get the president more votes from the youth, is but a drop in the bucket. And it is doing our national debt zero favors.
Now turning to student debt relief. When I ran for president, I vowed to fix our broken student loan program. Because while college degree is still the ticket to a better life, that ticket has become excessively expensive. Americans who are saddled with unsustainable debt in exchange for a college degree has become the norm.
Now, according to the Biden administration, this debt relief is, quote, a step towards making higher education more accessible and affordable. The nerve of this administration, honestly, the nerve. The unaffordable nature of American universities, where all this debt is derived from, can be partially attributed to the federal government in the first place. Let's go back to 1965 with the Higher Education Act. That created student aid on the federal level. Now, it was originally designed to assist students in college tuition, but of course the big universities took notice and took advantage, knowing that so long as students had access to a huge central government's funds, they could find every excuse under the sun to raise tuition costs. And of course, that is exactly what they did. Now, the federal government since then has become the largest provider of student loans. The largest provider. And it's not close. There are plenty of other regulations and such that delve into the federal government sticking their nose into universities, making them more expensive in the long run. Pell Grants have also negatively affected tuition. And at the moment, there are little incentives for colleges to reduce the cost burden on students in the first place. Now, in order to rectify this issue, our increasingly large government has decided to funnel money into the problem that they partially created in the midst of extreme economic uncertainty. Now, lest we forget, the people taking out these loans are adults. They are 18 plus. If I go buy some AirPods on my Apple card, I am agreeing to pay that back. It is a credit card. It is a line of credit. It is essentially a small loan. If I do not pay it back, I am full aware. If I don't pay it back in full, I'm full aware of the interest rate that will then follow suit on that purchase, because that's what I agreed to. That's what I signed up for. When you take out a loan, you know what you're getting yourself into. Now, sure, predatory loans exist. That's a very real thing. Look at payday loans and such. They're the modern day loan shark. But in the case of federally backed student loans, the government is throwing the entire concept of creditworthiness out the window. You get a loan, and you get relief, and you get a loan, and you get this, and you get that, and you don't have to pay yours back right now. It's ridiculous. It is asinine. What does it really mean when the government pays for something? Well, where does the government get all that income from? The taxpayer, of course, us. That money doesn't pop out of thin air, though President Biden sure thinks it does. The money printers for the USD just consider running like rampant. It's a fiat currency. It's essentially backed by nothing. However, we are the ones that are filling the government's pocket. We are all burdened with repaying a loan, to repaying these loans, current taxpayers and future. People in my age demographic will feel the consequences of this for decades to come. We are repaying a loan, in some cases, to some blue-haired, non-binary that got a degree in anthropology with a minor in dance. And then they sit there, waddle their arms, and cry up at the world and yell, "This is unfair and unjust. I signed up for these loans with the promise that I would get a good paying job, and now I can't do just that." Well, of course you can't. Look at what you signed up for. Read your degree. Okay, if it's not medicine, STEM, law, in a lot of cases, business administration, when you get into the weird majors like anthropology, dance, film, and it's not in California, come on. Now, let me go back to the whole Apple Card thing for a second, because this will tie into it. The largest debt burden to the average American is not student loan debt. It is total household debt, which reached a staggering $17.06 trillion this year, a far cry from the $1.76 trillion that currently plague student borrowers. Household debt includes mortgages, auto loans, credit cards, personal loans, and credit card debt itself is at just about $1 trillion and climbing at an extremely rapid pace due to no Americans having any semblance of financial literacy and the increasingly repugnant cost of living around the entire country. Should the government step in and say, "Oh, that Discover card's maxed out? We'll take care of it"? Should Biden knock on your door, say he'll pay your mortgage, consider it wiped? That new Tesla you bought? We got it covered. Of course not. Nor would they. All of this student loan, that being such a key issue for Biden, he may be a houseplant, but he's not a stupid houseplant. He's feeding into the hearts of the young voter demographic. As young voters increasingly vote more often, the 18 to 25-year-old voter range increased from about 36% participation in the 2016 presidential election for eligible voters to just about 50% in 2020. Young people are waking up. They want to vote more often. We're at the height of the information age. Why wouldn't they? I don't blame them. But young people are also extremely impressionable, and he's feeding into that. He's using emotion to his advantage. That's what the Democrats always do. When you hear Ben Shapiro say, "Facts don't care about your feelings," well, that's because more often than not, conservatives use facts and the liberals, the feelings. That's how they win. They strike it at the heart. So when a prospective voter who's young and probably in a little bit of student debt or maybe just signed up for a loan hears this, well, they're going to get excited. They're going to be like, "Yeah, this makes sense. This is essentially free money. Why not?" Of course, not understanding the economic ramifications that follow suit. Now, I'm also very confused by the administration's belief that wiping out the current debt will make college somehow more accessible. Make it more accessible. Where is the legislation to back up this claim? Where were the regulations capping tuition or reforming how public universities work in the first place? Well, I'll tell you where. It's nowhere to be found. It doesn't exist. It's vaporware. Because the Biden administration does not believe in letting the legislature legislate. And to that end, I can't even blame them. Congress would rather fight over Kevin McCarthy and Senator Fetterman wearing a greasy Carhartt shirt to work than pass meaningful legislation that actually helps the American people. You know, the thing that they were elected to do. Biden just executive orders everything in sight. He doesn't care about checks and balances. He doesn't care about the Supreme Court ruling that essentially told Biden his student loan cancellation efforts are unconstitutional by trying to use the executive branch as a legislature, essentially. And he doesn't care about the financial ramifications that will follow his abhorrent spending practices, because he won't be around for much longer to live in the mess that he's creating. The houseplant of a president is 80 years old, and he's not a very lively 80 at that. He's got it made. He's got several houses, and his son, allegedly, funnels money to him every week from God knows what. Hunter is a story in and of itself, of course. I won't even delve into that rabbit hole right now. Biden doesn't care about you or me or anyone. That goes for most politicians, in case you haven't noticed. The only thing the president cares about is taking his midday nap and cleaning his Corvette in his garage in Delaware while sitting on a box of classified documents that he will face zero repercussions for. It is a very simple concept. Free money does not exist. Free, especially when we're talking about the government, does not exist. The money has to come from somewhere. We have an extremely large deficit in this country. Now is not the time to be spending willy-nilly. Especially not drop in the bucket spending. Especially not spending for the sake of getting some votes. Honestly, just terrible policy all around. Now, staying on the topic of economic uncertainty, a new report from Adam reveals that homeownership expenses have shot up at an alarming rate. A reported 79.5% of U.S. counties are now labeled as unaffordable. That's both for current and prospective homeowners. Now, if you're like me, and you're young and rent, and you fantasize about the white picket fence and the boat in the driveway and picking out new shingles and, the American dream, well, that dream is dying. And it has been dying for quite some time. I'm sorry to burst your bubble. My bubble's bursted too, but it's the truth. The recent interest rate hikes have been a bit of a double-edged sword. You see, whilst the aim is to curb inflation, these increases have made mortgages a hilariously awful deal. The average interest rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage is damn near 8% as of today. By the way, is the highest we've seen since the turn of the century, since the year 2000. Now, what does this exactly mean for you? Well, I'll tell you. See, a mortgage rate is essentially the cost to you of borrowing money to purchase a home, just as the interest on any loan would be. An 8% interest rate would mean way higher payments each month on your new home that you just bought than you would otherwise pay in a more normal and fiscally responsible economy. That in turn will then increase the total cost of your home and lessening return should you sell one day due to the increase in said interest payments. A higher payment also means your buying power is of course lessened because you're paying more per month than you should. You got to put more money towards the home. And all of these factors and more also lead to a decrease in new home construction as developers grow increasingly wary on the prospect of new home buyers, creating less supply in the market, which in turn exacerbates the affordability issue further. It's estimated that in about 80% of U.S. counties, you should be making at least $75,000 a year to somewhat comfortably afford a new home. That's not just, a nice part of Naples and Florida. That's in most of the country, save for Wyoming, which has a lower population than the amount of illegal immigrants have entered the country in the last 4 years. Greed and arbitrary regulation have also played a role in murdering the prospect of owning a home before you're 30. You see, local government development fees have been deterring would-be home builders, as well as land development restrictions. Inclusionary zoning is a huge one. First one that comes to mind. See, inclusionary zoning requires developers to include a certain percentage of affordable housing units in new developments. More often than not, that creates an increase in cost for market rate homes. You got to subsidize the affordable units somehow. You can't just take a complete loss. If I have 10 walnuts and I'm being told that even though I sell them for $5 each, 3 of them have to be way lower because not everyone can afford a $5 walnut. Well, I'll sell 3 of them for $2, but then I got to raise the price on the other walnuts. Now those are going to be $7. It's crazy. This is just like the tuition thing, right? In a sense that every time the government, any government for that matter, around the world, in the US, federal, state, local, municipal, tribal, you name it, anytime the government sticks its big nose in an industry, said industry tends to turn into a financially apocalyptic war zone of despair, all in the name of equity and fairness. When Ronald Reagan said that the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help," the dude was spot on. Spot on. Needless government intervention has wreaked havoc on us as a society, and we only have ourselves to blame. Every time the government wants an inch, we give it to them. What do they do with that inch? They take 1,000 miles from that inch. Every single time. It really sucks too. It does. Who doesn't want to own a home? Again, that is literally the American dream. Some property, nice single family home. It's increasingly becoming a rarity. And the future is bleak. It really is. We may enter a world where you own nothing and you will love it. Where everything is leased, everything is rented. Look at subscriptions. Software. I mean, Final Cut Pro on the iPad. There is no technical way to own it. It is a subscription fee no matter what. And that is a very common theme with apps and other pieces of software. Photoshop, Adobe After Effects, the entire Creative Cloud suite. It's the same thing there. You don't own it anymore. You don't own anything. For some things, it's not bad. Netflix is a great concept. Xbox Game Pass, great concept. I don't need to own every single video game under the sun because, quite frankly, once I beat it or once the new version comes out, I don't touch it. But that shouldn't be applied to every facet of life. You have to own things. And society, as we know it in the future, owning, it may just be a relic of the past. They'll tell us it's good for us. They'll tell us this is the way to do it. And it won't be. It won't be. Now, switching industries for a moment, let's go away from the housing market and let's talk about big pharma, which is a great topic of mine. And in case you didn't know, I recently launched the YouTube channel for the show, and I'm sure this topic will get me quickly ripped off that platform, which is fine. And that's why the video format will always be posted on X in addition to YouTube, and the audio format wherever else you may get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, so on and so forth. Anyways, Sudafed PE and similar decongestants such as Dayquil and Benadryl, the Allergy Plus variant of that, I believe, well, they've recently been classified as possibly ineffective by the FDA. Yeah. Half of your medicine cabinet is essentially useless. Now, in order to understand how this could have slipped under the radar of one of our country's largest bureaucratic departments, that is the FDA, of course, we have to go back to 2006. You see, back in 2006, in an effort to fight the mostly unsuccessful war on drugs, the federal government decided to regulate decongestants. And as we all know, I just went on a whole spiel about it, government regulation typically leads to failure and disaster. Now, if you've ever watched Breaking Bad, you probably know where I'm going to go with this, but for the uninformed, way back when, decongestants such as Sudafed often used pseudoephedrine, a key ingredient formerly in other over-the-counter decongestants that work by narrowing blood vessels in your nasal passages. Now, this would alleviate congestion and improve airflow through your schnoz. Pseudoephedrine was also commonly utilized, and still is, to manufacture meth. So, you could, back in the 90s and early 2000s, you clear your airways and turn into a crackhead, all for a great low price at CVS. Now, in comes the Epidemic Act, which was tucked into the Patriot Act, that forced Sudafed and other drugs containing pseudoephedrine for decongestion purposes to go behind the counter rather than over the counter in an effort to curb meth production. This regulation led to the introduction of Sudafed PE and similar drugs such as Dayquil. These new drugs used phenylephrine as a replacement to the former drug that I really want to stop saying, because I keep on I'm just at the cusp of tripping on that word, pseudoephedrine. Anyways, this replacement was immediately sold to regulators, and it was all a fib, right? It was all a ruse. An advisory panel to the FDA recently voted unanimously to rule phenylephrine ineffective when taken orally, which of course is the most common method for using the drug. This panel came to be after a 2015 citizen petition filed from a professor at University of Florida argued that the drug is useless orally. Now, the path has been paved to get Sudafed PE, Dayquil, and a lot of these other drugs pulled off of shelves. Because if they're essentially useless, there's no need for people to be buying them. Pharmaceutical professor Randy Hatton of University of Florida was stated, quote, "It has been an open secret among pharmacists." So the pharmaceutical company knew about this. They knew it barely worked. And they raked in billions whilst lying to the American public, which is a common theme for a lot of these big industries. You don't know much about them, but you trust them anyways. Now that, of course, leads me to question, and it should lead you to question as well, what else are they lying about? The pharmaceutical industry is huge. It's huge. In fact, it's worth approximately $685 billion in the United States alone. A lot of these pharmaceutical companies, they're sleazy. They're not very transparent. You need some proof? What happened to the overall effectiveness of the COVID vaccines? What started as a near guarantee to block COVID from your system turned into, well, you may still get it, but you'll be asymptomatic and you won't be able to spread it. That then turned into, well, you'll be symptomatic, but the symptoms won't be that bad. You'll be fine. It'll be like a common cold, which a lot of people who got COVID back in 2020 reported symptoms that weren't much worse than the common cold anyways. Now, fast forward to this year, and now it's, well, COVID's coming back because it mutated and there's new strains, and you may have to wear a mask again, and you're going to have to get multiple shots. We're basically going to turn the COVID vaccine into a flu shot. The only difference is you don't have to take a flu shot. You don't take the COVID shot. You could lose your public job, which is great. But hey, you got a free Krispy Kreme donut out of it. You got 15% off for Target Circle out of it. So it's a win, right? Now, I'm sure Chris Christie got multiple shots for that sweet donut deal because he didn't care about the effectiveness. He just wanted the calories. But I got the shot too. I got it too. It was stupid. I trusted what the science said. And now I feel cheated. I feel lied to. I've also got Dayquil in my cabinet. I feel cheated about that as well. Will there be any ramifications for big pharma in general? For the vaccine or for phenylephrine? Of course not. Of course not. There never is. Our representatives in government are largely owned by the likes of Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, and other big pharma companies. Now, it should be noted that phenylephrine is quite effective if taken nasally. So drugs such as neosynephrine and others well, they'll still work mostly fine. But that honey-flavored fever syrup in your cabinet, yeah, no. That's about as effective as eating hot ramen noodles and putting sliced potatoes in your socks when you go to bed and guzzling down a gallon of elderberry. This is not a particularly good look for Big Pharma. That's especially as Americans continue to distrust them and a lot of industries across the country. Big tech, big pharma, hell, the retail space, with all these equity index scores and such, it's people are starting to really dislike the big players, the ones that, for what it's worth, do drive our economy. It's an issue. So the next time you're feeling a bit feverish, you rip open the cabinet and you get ready to chug down some Dayquil, some Sudafed PE. Just remember that you're not doing anything. You're just putting a mildly bad taste in your mouth for the hell of it. Which is, again, just insane. But let's move on to some quick updates going on around the country. First one, and when I saw this headline on Apple News, I was sipping my coffee, and I was just taking some notes for what we were going to talk about on the podcast today. You know, the usual stuff. I came to learn that the Biden administration has reversed their border wall policy, and construction has resumed. President Biden pledged that not another foot, quote unquote, of the border wall would be built on his watch during his campaign. Yet now they intend to build about 20 miles of new Trump wall across the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, which, by the way, is one of the busiest crossing spots for illegals at the moment. How busy? How busy we talking? 245,000 illegal entries have been reported at the Rio Grande Valley. 245,000? 245,000! That is an astronomically large number of people just flowing in illegally in one port of entry. The population of my hometown back on Long Island is about 7,200, give or take. 240. That's crazy. It's crazy for one crossing. That's 245,000 people we don't know. In most cases, we cannot verify their identification, who they really are, their affiliations of any kind. 245,000. And now President Biden, of course, is eating that number along with his 4 p.m. porridge today, because that wall is getting put up. That bad boy is getting built. 20 miles, so not, anything extremely groundbreaking, but that is certainly better than nothing. I'm glad he finally opened his very, very saggy eyes, though something tells me this wasn't completely his decision. Straying away from migrants, but keeping the Texas theme, the Cybertruck is nearing release, which is awesome. We'll see if they can actually meet the assembly and delivery for Q4 of this year, which is drawing to an end in just a couple months. Spooky season, it's October, which basically means it's Christmas. But yeah, no, this is awesome news. This comes at the same time that Ford announced cancellations of F-150 Lightning orders, and Rivian missed the mark earlier this quarter on delivery expectations yet again, which is a shame because I actually think that the Rivian R1T is a fantastic little pickup truck. It's just expensive. And some of them have been having weird drainage issues with water. I think Snazzy Labs, Quinn from Snazzy Labs posts on X, his Rivian, like the door jamb, the door pocket, that panel, it looked like an aquarium. So they definitely have some kinks to work out. The refrigerator on wheels has been spotted fully operational at Starbase, which is a spaceport operated by SpaceX in Texas. It was towing a Raptor rocket engine. Now, I know a lot of people find this truck hideous, but I happen to think that's the beauty of it. I think its ugliness is what makes that thing shine. That post-future DeLorean, I don't even know. That thing looks cool. That thing is badass. So I'm really excited to see when they finally hit the road. Now, of course, upon release, it'll be one of the most aerodynamic and best electric pickup trucks, or in terms of aerodynamics, I think one of the most aerodynamic vehicles, period, at least one that's mass produced. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's more aerodynamic than a Bugatti Chiron. I know Elon on stage when they announced it all those years back, or not all those years, but it certainly feels like that. I remember him putting a Bugatti up on the stage. I just don't remember if it was the Chiron or which model, but regardless, that is an incredible engineering feat. So yeah, I'm super excited for this bad boy to come out. I cannot wait to see these things just dominate the road. I'm a huge fan of EVs, especially in the pickup truck segment, because that is arguably the most important segment for EVs to succeed in. The F-150 is the best-selling car in the U.S., period. It is a huge market that Tesla or any EV manufacturer at that can just cannibalize, make a ton of money in that market. Well, that's all that I have for you today. Be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, X, or wherever it is that you consume podcasts. We are on every single platform you can think of. I'm all over the place, baby. You cannot escape me, no matter what corner of the internet you're on. Thank you for tuning in today. I'll see you on Monday, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.